Posebno dobrodošli naravno za vašu Tomasu. Kako da
Hello guys, I hope everybody can hear me okay, especially on the live stream. Before we actually start with the presentation, I just want to briefly thank everybody who helped us do this event today. Firstly, Tersaus, our biggest friends for this event, they helped us organize it, they gave us this beautiful space, and they helped us with all the logistics we needed. Second sponsor we want to thank is Oaza Water. They provided us with the water today, and our media coverage is going to be covered by Radio Sarajevo.ba. And I'm super proud to be a technical sponsor of the event with my company Forge 42. We plan to organize more Remix events in the future. We also helped organize today's event. And yeah, that's it for the introduction. Thank you everybody for sponsoring us and supporting us. And now we're gonna start with my presentation, and that's what is Remix.run. So just to gauge at the general knowledge here, who here is a front-end developer? All right, back-end. All right, full stack. Anybody? Okay, a few people. All right. So Remix is much more than a front-end framework or a back-end framework. It's mostly a full-stack framework built for building better websites. And before I go into Remix, I firstly want to briefly go over who I am. My name is Alan Tuzlak. I've been doing open source for about a year now. Recently, a few days ago, my open source packages crossed 1 million downloads. I also do YouTube, I do blogging. You can actually scan this QR code to go to my YouTube channel where I do Remix content. Some of my packages are actually used by Docker. I contributed to Remix.run itself. And that's briefly about me. And now we can go into the actual topic at hand, and that's what is Remix.run. So Remix mantra is building better websites. So they don't really encourage you just to build better websites with their software. They encourage you to learn the fundamentals of the web development and build better websites for your users, regardless of what you use. One fun fact is that they are currently owned by Shopify, which is one of the biggest e-commerce platforms in the world. They actually have a net revenue of $80 billion. So they're pretty well funded as a open source full stack framework, and they don't really rely on their users in any way to make money. So which allows the team to actually build better websites without worrying so much about how to monetize it. A good way to ask yourself is it React Router but on steroids? And it kind of is. If you ever use React Router in your apps, and you probably have because most React apps today actually use React Router, it's pretty similar to React Router version 6 at the moment. And most of the APIs that Remix provides is actually re-exported from the React Router package. It's just extra benefits on top. And a few months ago, they released a Vite plugin, and they marketed themselves as just a Vite plugin. And they're a little bit more than that, but what this essentially means is, if you're using Vite, you can actually just inject Remix into your app by importing their plugin for Vite and getting all the benefits that they offer out of the box. Well, actually, depending if you're using a React Router app, if you're just starting out, you can just plug it in. If not, you would have to migrate it. But I'll talk about that a little bit later on. And a good way to also look at it is that it's a gateway into web fundamentals. So what do I mean by this? If you ever written code on the web, you probably know that there are web APIs that you can use, like creating URLs, creating search parameters, and a lot of other APIs like view transitions, and every day there's a new web API which you can hook into and use in your project. So it's really an ever-evolving system, and Remix really encourages you to actually learn the web platform and rely on the web platform instead of the framework in terms of developing your code. And this is actually a bridge to the future of React. If you've read the news, React 19 is coming in a few weeks. It's already in beta release. Well, actually, there's a release candidate out right now, and you can actually switch to React 19. It's considered stable. They're just making sure that nothing crucial breaks before they release it. So it's going to come out really soon. And this will be your golden ticket to moving to React Router 7 and React 19, and basically moving to the future of web development, because React 19 is going to open up so many possibilities, like React Server components that you've probably heard about. And I'm really excited for the future. But for now, we're talking about Remix and not the future. So is it, if you know the term silver bullet, it basically means something that's perfect for each scenario. And there is no tech that's a silver bullet, but Remix comes really close to that. And how I like to describe it, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a great bullet. And what does it have to offer on top of React Router? The first thing is automatic code splitting. So what this means, when you bundle your app for production, it doesn't bundle it into a huge chunk in a single file, but rather it looks at all your routes and creates smaller bundles that are manageable in size, packs everything into the bundles, like dependencies and your code. It doesn't include dependencies you don't actually use on your routes. And there's a lot of optimization behind the scenes that it does, but that's the gist of it. The next thing is simplified data loading. I will go into detail on what this is exactly, but you might have heard about loaders and client loaders. They're basically a way for you to fetch data before it even reaches the React component that renders the UI itself. The next thing is progressive enhancement. This term is relatively new, and what this basically means is it allows you to create JavaScript applications that can run without JavaScript. So what does this mean? Basically, if you, let's say, create a form that submits some data to the backend, and your JavaScript doesn't load on the page, or the user simply disabled it for some godforsaken reason, you can actually submit your data without JavaScript, and it's still going to work like it has JavaScript. That's a technique very specific to Remix at the moment. I haven't seen really great examples of other frameworks, maybe next. But the great thing about this is that it allows you to actually create apps from the ground up and just add stuff on top. And that brings us into simplified pending states and optimistic UI. What optimistic UI is, if you don't know, it's basically a way for you to show the user something before it actually happens. And what does that mean? So if, let's say, you're using Facebook and you want to like something, you're going to press like, and it's automatically going to show you that you liked it, even though the server hasn't still saved your like in the database. It hasn't responded that it saved it. You're optimistically going to show that it's saved, and the user is going to think it's instant, even though it isn't. And the simplified pending states, it allows, so Remix offers you hooks in React that you can hook into pending states. So if you're submitting something to the server, you actually get a really nice utility to let you know if the data has been submitted or not, if it's finished, if you're being redirected to a new page and stuff like that. And then another thing is server rendering. Server rendering helps with a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically stuff like making sure that you don't have content shift, which basically means if you render your page, your content and the layout on the page is not going to move when the JavaScript loads. It stops flashes of incorrect style content and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that goes in this behind the scenes. It also helps you with your Lighthouse scores on Google, helps you with SEO and stuff like that. And the other two things that I'm not gonna go into detail, but static pre-rendering, this means that you can render, for example, your blog pages before you actually bundle the application, which means you can cache them indefinitely and instantly show them to your user without any sort of delay. But this has not been added to Remix yet. This is coming soon, and this will be a part of React Router. And also there are React server components. That's the hot new topic of React. They allow you to stream sensitive data to your client and expose your sensitive internal data. They also help you explode your network with bundle sizes. And if it isn't too obvious, I'm obviously joking. You can actually use them for a lot of cool things, like you could create components that render on the server, inject secrets into them in a safe way, and then send them to the client and then show them on the client with rendering happening on the server, which means by the time they reach the client, they're almost finished rendering, which speeds up your application, basically. And those are some of the features that Remix offers. And before I actually go into all the paradigms you can use with Remix, I quickly want to cover file naming conventions. So I'm not going to go over all of them because it's not really important for the talk I'm talking here, but basically you have normal routes, and you can, for example, if you create a user TSX file, that's going to match the URL of /user. So if you go to /user, you're going to see whatever is in the user TSX file. You have param routes that allows you to basically send params in the URL. So for example, if you do $user ID, you're going to be able to pass user ID as the parameter in the URL. You have the template routes. This basically allows you to render UI that you want without actually adding it to the URL. For example, if you want to render a dashboard UI on your screen, but you don't want the route to be dashboard/user, you can just use the template to render it without worrying about it. And as you can see, it ends up being /user/1. And then you have the wildcard routes. These are basically routes that are special. You just do $.tsx or this extension. You can use JSX as well. And basically, these are catch-all routes, basically 404. They allow you to render whatever you want. And the next important thing I need to cover before we jump into what Remix is file modules. Remix has a concept of a file module, and what this means, put very simply, is you have a file which has a bunch of exports. Some of the exports go into the server bundle, some of the exports go into the client bundle, some goes into both. And all of those exports in that file are considered a file module. And whatever you export from a file gets picked up by Remix automatically, and something is done with it. For example, for the server, we have the loader and the action. The loader is fired before you see any UI. So it's used to fetch data. Basically, it's like a GET request. And the action is like a post request, and this happens when you submit data or do some mutations. You actually send something to an action, and then you handle it from there. You have the browser part of the module, which is the client loader and the client action. So these are like small cousins of the loader and the action, and they actually run on the client only. They don't run on the server. And it's something like a middleware between the loader and the component, where you can do something with the data before it reaches the component. And then we finally have the last piece of the cake, and that's something that gets bundled into both bundles, both the server and the client. So those are links, meta tags, component, error boundary, and should revalidate. Links allow you to add links to your page in the HTML in the head. So for example, if you want to add a style sheet, you can add it in the link. You can optimize the links to preload, to be cached, to do whatever you want. You have the meta export that allows you to basically export a function that allows you to define metadata on the page. So for example, title, description of the page, images when you share it on social media like Facebook. You have the component, and that's basically the UI that gets rendered. This is the meat of the application. The whole flow goes from the loader, it goes into the component, and then the action. And there's a fine loop going on in between each. Then there's the error boundary. The error boundary allows you to, if you have errors on your client, if you have errors on your server, you don't crash your whole application, just show a piece of the UI differently. For example, if you have the dashboard, you have your header, you have your navigation, it crashes. You don't want to hide the header and the navigation, you just want to show an error screen on the middle of the dashboard. You can use the error boundary in the dashboard template to actually hide the error inside and encapsulate it inside of that component so it doesn't crash your whole UI. And the should revalidate hook is a very specific hook that you can use to not fire loaders, but you don't really need to care about that because it's not important for the talk. And now we get into how does Remix.run work. So in a traditional setting, you have your browser, and when you go to any web page, what happens is the browser sends a document request to some sort of server. This can be anything. It can be a Node.js like it is in this example, but it can be anything. It can be, I don't know, Horno server. It can be Dino server. It doesn't even have to be a JavaScript server. It's just a server. It can be something like deployed in Cloudflare, whatever. And then the server sends you back the response. Usually, how web pages work is they either send you index.html, which is an HTML file, and then they have imports that import JavaScript and everything else. And then when it's loaded on the browser, what happens is basically the HTML is rendered. The app tries to fetch your JavaScript code. You have to wait for that to happen. And once it's fetched, it's shown to the user. This doesn't really necessarily mean that it takes a while for it to happen. It can be in milliseconds, but that's the usual flow. Now, here is where Remix comes in. And it basically acts like a middleware on the server. And what happens is when the browser actually sends a document request, your node server, whatever server, sends it to Remix. And what happens is Remix handles everything for you. It renders the HTML on the server and then streams it back to the client. And the important part that happens is once it's streamed from the server to the client here, client-side part in the browser is available. And what happens basically is it allows your browsers to actually switch to client-side navigations, and then you have something of an experience like a classical Remix React app, where you basically have instant transitions from one page to the other. And this is an example to show you how the whole flow works. So in the top left corner, you can see user/1. So what we're doing here is we're simulating what happens when you go to this URL on your app. The browser sends a request to your server. So when the request happens, I just told you that a document request happens. But what happens is each of the file modules I told you earlier about, so these are files that you create that export these specially named exports like loader and meta, they get called in parallel. So what happens is the server sends it to Remix, and each request is hit in parallel to each loader. So for example, if we have user/1, the first request is going to be sent to the /user route, that is user.tsx. The loader is gonna handle whatever it needs to handle. It's gonna pass the return data to meta tags that allow you to, for example, if you have a blog post or the user ID here, you can pass it to the meta, so you can add, I don't know, the user's picture, his name, and stuff like that in the URL, in the head. And then that loader responds to the server, but there's a different loader because we are on /user/1. Both of these get called in parallel, and this route here, user.user.tsx, is going to get the last part of the URL, that's /1. It's also going to do the identical thing that the first loader does, and it's going to respond to the server. So because these are fired in parallel, what is going to happen is they are going to, in parallel, respond to your browser. So basically, that means whenever you go to a route, you're firing multiple requests at the same time, which allow you to actually fetch data faster because it's not done in a serial order, but a parallel one. And the cool thing about this whole flow is if you want to use, so I know that a lot of companies in Bosnia like .NET and they swear in it. And let's say you don't want to use Remix entirely, you want to hit your API endpoints on your .NET backend, and you want to transform the data in some way and then send it back to your browser. What you can do is just plug in a .NET backend, and in each of your loaders, send requests to appropriate APIs, and then when you get that data, you just send it back. And this allows you basically to use Remix in a BFF mode. And no, this doesn't mean best friends forever, even though you should be with Remix. This basically means that it's a backend for a front-end pattern, and this means that you can use Remix to render the UI, show everything to the user, but your backend is somewhere else and you're just hitting the endpoints. And the great thing about Remix is, let's say, what do we want to do if you want to do client fetching? So that means, let's say, your loaders have returned the data, but you want to transform them in some way, or maybe you want to hit some other API endpoints on the client instead of the server. Well, the best thing about Remix is that it's really flexible and it allows you to do whatever you want. So when the server responds to the browser, each of the client loader exports I showed you earlier gets called before it's responded to the browser. And this means that you can transform your data from your loaders on the client and do anything you want with them. And a cool use case for client loaders in Remix at the moment is that you can basically use them as cache because they're middleware between the server and the browser. If you want to render some page and once the data is fetched, you don't want to wait for the response again, you just want to show it instantly, you can use client loaders to actually cache your data. And basically, for example, if you have 5 blog posts and you open up each one, you navigate between the blog posts. After the first load is going to instantly show you the blog post again without any waiting, without any loaders, without anything. It's instant. And let's say, so knowing React, most of React apps are either Vite React apps that are single-page applications, and this means you have an indexed HTML file, you import your CSS, you import your JavaScript into it, it renders on the server, on the browser, you wait for the client bundle to load, you optimize the client bundle, and let's say your organization, your company uses a single-page application. So how can I use Remix as a single-page app? Well, it's actually really simple because you don't need a server for Remix. You can actually use it in a single-page application mode where you have a non-Remix server, and that can also be a .NET backend server if you like, or whatever you want. And your client loaders actually send the requests and responses to your server, and you actually have a single-page application app that acts the same way that a normal React app does, but with the benefits I mentioned earlier, like automatic code splitting and other stuff like pending UI, or optimistic UI, and so on and so forth. And yeah, so the important thing to take away from this talk and the Remix in general is Remix is so much more than a specific niche and so much more than something that you use for one specific use case. The Remix team has put a lot of work in the last 2 years to make it as modular as possible and to give you as many options as they can. So why it's so cool is that it gives you so many levers to pull. You can use it as a BFF, you can use it as a SPA app, you can use it as a full stack framework, you can do whatever you want with it. And because the Remix team is actually the same people who develop React Router, they have I think 8 million public repositories that use React Router, which means there are probably like 80 million private ones using them because most of repositories on GitHub are private. And they want you to have a nice migration path between your old Create React app that uses deprecated technologies like CRI, and they want you to be able to move to the future in small digestible steps. So what does this mean for you? So let's say you have a React Router 6 app, you're using it with Create React app, and you want to move to Remix. So the migration path is pretty simple. The first thing you need to do is migrate to Wheat. Wheat is an open source bundling and development and so many other things tool that allows you to basically bundle your code, easily run it in development. It does so many things I can't even explain it right now, but let's say you migrate to Wheat. Well, what's next? You just add a Wheat plugin that's imported from Remix, and you just set a feature flag called spa mode and set it to true, and you already have all the benefits I mentioned earlier, but it's basically just a Wheat plugin. And why is this so cool? Because it allows you to incrementally move from old technologies that are deprecated and not as popular anymore. They're slow. If you've ever used Create React app and then you use the Vite app, you probably want to do bad things to yourself if you ever had to go back. And the last part is, if you want to move from your spa mode app to a full featured framework with the server and everything, you want to use React server components, you want to have the whole feature set, the next thing is you just need to move your fetching that's done on the client, basically probably with React query, but you don't even have to throw that out because it's just a great caching library at the end of the day. You just move your data fetching from your client to the server, and you have the full powers of Remix at the palm of your hand. And the best thing about all of this is that Remix is going to be, all the features of Remix are going to be merged back into React Router version 7, which means whenever React Router version 7 comes out, you're going to be able to have the next generation of React at the palm of your hands with just incremental path to moving to Remix. And that's it for me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I think this is the perfect time to ask if you have any questions, comments, anything. What differentiates it from Vex? For example, excuse me. Hybrid rendering, when you want to have client and server rendering in one page. For example, I know how Next does. So how does that differentiate with Venice? Is it the same approach? Yeah, so hybrid rendering in Remix is basically by default. What happens is so you export your component from the file. So what happens is it's rendered on the server, it's sent to the client, and then the client basically hydrates it with React, which means you're sending your HTML to the client, it hydrates it, basically makes sure that the client version is in sync with the server one, and it renders it. So that's how it works by default in Next.js. It's basically hybrid rendering by default. Thank you. Nermine. Yeah, I would choose Remix or Next, but that's for personal reasons. They're both great frameworks, and I don't really like recommending anything over anything else. I think that in order to build better websites, you need to use what you're comfortable with, what you know, and what you think is great. When it comes to comparisons, it's really let me just briefly think about it. So Um, Let me just, I haven't used Next in a while, so I just need to update my brain to think about Next. So Next, I think the biggest, should I say this? So the Remix team has been building, let me answer it this way. The Remix team has been building Remix for over 2 years now, and they started when Corona happened, and basically their whole goal with Remix was to make better websites. And they built, so they sat down and decided to build the best way to build your web apps that you can. And I think React 19 itself and Next took a lot of inspiration from Remix, and they took a lot of inspiration from their data fetching paradigms. They took a lot of inspiration from the approaches they took, and they migrated it over to Next. For example, in the app router, for example, the export get, export post, export put, I think that was inspired by Remix with the loader and action, because the loader is the get request and the action is a post request in theory. I mean, it can be a put request, whatever, but you get point. And I think that best summarizes why Remix is so great, not compared to Next, but it really is an inspiration on how to build websites, because Remix's whole mantra is not to be a competitor to anybody. Their whole mantra is, let's build better websites together. And if Next.js, React 19, React 20, whatever, takes all our ideas that we had and allows us to build better websites, we don't care, as long as we build better websites. So I think that's the answer to the question. Yeah, so a lot of it happens in the community. So the community builds a lot of packages that support Remix, and I personally have built so many. I think I have 6 open source packages related to Remix at the moment. But Remix doesn't really force you to deploy in a certain way. It basically, because it's such a thin wrapper on the server, and it's in theory a middleware on the server, it allows you to deploy it basically anywhere. And I've been seeing a lot of talk on Twitter. For example, some new server comes out. For example, if you've heard about Bunny, you've probably heard about Ono and Alicia. And I think they got Remix working in both like in under a day, because it's such a great abstraction over that, and it's so easy to plug it in anywhere. And this in turn allows you to, as long as you're comfortable and familiar with deployments, with whatever you're using a node server, you're using Docker, you're using whatever, if you're familiar with that, you won't have problems with deploying Remix, because it's super simple. And there are, for example, Fly offers you like a lot of frameworks, third-party services for hosting that Thomas is going to talk about right now, offer you a great way of actually building it in a Docker file, like out of the box, and you just plug it into a project and you deploy it. Any other questions? Taibe, you then you.
So you mentioned that
Yes.
So what's the impact of the Remix as a brand? Like overshadowed by this?
Sure. Yeah, so I wasn't sure if I should mention the fact that it's going to be merged into React Router 7 precisely out of that reason. So what's going to happen is everything I just talked about is going to be React Router version 7. And the reason behind this is the Remix team, basically, as they were building Remix, they were porting back all these features back into React Router. And what this means in theory is that 90% of React Router is just Remix under the hood. So basically all of this is already in React Router, and most of the functionality is basically a re-export from React Router itself. And what they decided to do is they will merge this back into React Router because so many apps out there use React Router. And it's so easier to justify, well, it's not a migration if you think about it, because it's hard to justify to your manager that, hey, we're not going to use React Router anymore, we're going to use Remix. But it's so much easier to your manager to say, hey, we're not going to use React Router version 6, we're going to use version 7. And that's the reason they moved everything back to React Router 7. But they love the brand, and the Remix team is actually called the Remix team. They're not called the React Router team, and that's how they perceive themselves. They love the Remix brand, that they don't really have much of a branding. They don't have great branding with React Router, let's be realistic. It started like an open source library. It wasn't really thought through. So they really love the brand, and they plan to do great things with Remix. We just don't know yet what that exactly means. At this moment, I can just make guesses, but yeah, I think that's it. Dino.
So when I'm building a front-end app, there are two things that I find it the most. One is data fetching, other is caching.
Okay.
That's very before React Query was the best tool in the market for using. How does Remix handle that? And can you do a quick comparison? I know that you use the video to figure out.
Yes, so for the live stream audience, the question is to make a comparison between React Router, React Query and the Remix. And to be honest, I love React Query, and when I moved, or 10-stack query, and when I moved to Remix, I hated Remix because of this, because I couldn't use it. It turned out later I could, I just didn't know at the time. But that you can actually use React Query on both the client and the server with Remix. So it's not an either or, it's however you want to use it. So for example, if you heard about Remix Client Cache, the library I created for caching on the client, I actually created a POC where you could use React Query and use their dev tools to show you what's cached with Remix. And it took me like 20 lines of code. So it's not really a either or. Both are great. The reason that Remix is great for caching is because it gives you more choice. You can cache it on the server, you can cache it in the browser. The React Query only caches it in the browser, obviously, because that's where it runs, and it's more of a React app. So I think you can. That's like the main differentiator, that you have more choice in where you cache stuff, because some stuff makes sense to cache it on the server, some makes sense to cache it on the client. You want to cache something in a CDN, you want to cache something somewhere else. So I think that's the biggest benefit of Remix, is that you have more choice, but you can basically opt into using React Query on the client for everything. It's not really that difficult, and they actually expose, I think it's called a query client or something like that, that you can instantiate as an object, and then you can basically, in the client loaders, use that to put stuff in the cache, and then use use query hook? I kind of forgot, yeah, to basically cache it on the client. Anything else?
Now it's popular to use signals in React. So is there anything in Remix regarding signals?
Signals, I'm not familiar with. What do you mean by signals?
Yeah, there is a new approach of making like a application for user state.
Oh, yeah, so that's pretty new. I actually saw it on Twitter, but I didn't really look in, or sorry, X, but I never looked into it and how it works. So I can't tell you anything about Signal, but what I can tell you about Remix is that you don't need use state, you don't need use effect, because you fetch everything in the loaders and the client loaders. By the time the data reaches your component, it's already there, and you don't need to use any state. If you want to build complex forms, you can use, well, you can use the state in that case, even though there are form libraries that help you do that. But basically what you can do is create progressively enhanced forms that I talked about earlier. You can create inputs, but you have to know about web fundamentals, which brings me back to why it's so great. Because if you know web fundamentals, you don't need state. You just set the input in the HTML, let the form handle everything for you, and that's it. So that's the great thing about Remix. You don't really need a lot of React stuff in it. Anything else? All right. Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed my talk. I'll let Thomas take it from here. From the live stream audience, we're going to make a short break until we actually switch our mics. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
Even two mics. Okay. Feel free to grab something to drink. I just have to change the. Should work. Perfect. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Oh, perfect. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Alim, for giving us the introduction for the deployment talk, actually. So there were a lot of, you will see a lot of similarities. I will talk, but I will just briefly go over it, do a quick recap. Yeah, we are talking about where, how, and why to deploy your Remix application. So this direction. Yeah. Test. You can hear me. So yeah, topics for today. So first of all, Alim already went a little bit into the deployment differences to a regular React single page application. So what is the difference compared to a deployed Remix application? Then we will actually go into common deployment options for a Remix application. I will hopefully, you will see a live demo, hopefully. And then at the end, I will present to you a few links and next steps you could look into when it comes to the deployment. But before we start, a little bit about me. So yeah, together with Alim, I'm one of the co-founder of Forge42. Before we founded Forge42, I was working for Amazon Web Services. I was a solution architect there. I was working there by the way, I'm based in Austria. I'm living in Vienna, and I was working as a solution architect there for Amazon. And during this time I was working there, I was talking to a lot of different customers. So from startups to enterprises and everything in the middle. And so I saw a lot of different stacks, JavaScript, Java, .NET, whatever, you name it, small to big one. Companies who were doing really great, and also companies who were not so great when it comes to their development. So I gained a lot of experience, like seeing what's working good, what's working not so good. And before that, I was actually working. So my background is software engineering. I was software developer most of the time, and before I joined Amazon, I was building up a startup in Austria, and yeah, did everything from, started with server administration and software architecture and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit of my background, and I'm also more of a backend developer than frontend, but with Remix, it's you are both basically. Yeah. So what are the wrong direction? So what are the deployment differences to a regular single page application? So to understand how to choose a hosting provider, we first have to understand the requirements and therefore the difference to a regular single page application you might be familiar with. So let's start with a regular React single page application. How does it look like? So you developed your React single page application, you build it, so you have a bundle, so it all starts with your React.js bundle. You have a server somewhere, it doesn't matter where or what it is, you deploy it, you deploy the bundle there. So then your users, they will use the browser usually, they will make a request, and in response to this request, they will get served the React.js bundle. And from there on, it's basically everything is running on the browser, right? So Alem already went a little bit into more detail in that, but from a high-level perspective, you have a browser. The browser has everything it needs to run. All the logic is on the browser, routing logic, everything is on the browser. So yeah, but you also want to display data. So this is where server or API server comes into play. And usually this server talks GraphQL, REST API, or everything in between. The API server has a database, and the browser makes requests and gets the data in response. So this is the regular approach, right, with the React single page application. So what does that mean? For the browser, it means everything when it comes to state management is on the browser. Application code, as I already mentioned, is just executed on the client. But also this setup needs a setup for authentication with your API server. Even more so if your application requires your users to log in. You usually have an OAuth authentication flow, so you make authenticated, authorized requests to your API so that the API knows, okay, this user is allowed to see its data. But also it oftentimes requires you to have a course setup. So I see some nodding, so it's not always that easy, or a source of many debugging sessions. Yeah, and for the server, yeah, it basically means it has already done its job, right? Because its job was just serving static content. So that's it, basically. Yeah, and how does it look like for a Remix application? So for Remix, again, you develop your Remix application, you build your application, you end up having this bundle, but this time you already have like server bundle and the client bundle. So the Remix bundle itself consists of these two things. You don't have to take care of it. Remix or the Vite plugin basically takes care of like splitting your code accordingly. Again, you have a server, you deploy this bundle to the server. Again, you have a browser makes a request. Depending on the route your browser is requesting, in this case, it's just the home page, but it could be any URL. And depending on the request URL, you get the response. But in this case, as Alem also already mentioned, you get just served the client bundle, but not the whole bundle, but just the code which is necessary to render the specific request the browser has made. And yeah, of course, in this case, we also need to display data. So whenever we want to show data, the browser makes requests, but in this case, we are talking to our Remix server, wherever this, we have deployed it. So we don't have a separated, dedicated API server, but the Remix server itself takes care of it. And that also means, and this is one of the things I want to point out, one of the differences is for a React single page application, right? React single page application, you run it locally, you have your clients, you deploy the static assets, and then basically you trust your backend developers providing the API that it's matching. In this case, if you are a developer of a Remix application, you are responsible for choosing the right data store, for scale it, and also like, yeah, you are responsible for doing that. This is the BFF pattern we have already heard. You have already an existing and working backend. Doesn't matter in which programming language it is developed. You don't need to have your own database, or you have your own database, and in addition, you also want to talk to an API server. So that's the usual approach. So what implication does this have in the Remix deployment scenario? You will rarely see any state management on the browser. So your React client-side code, you will rarely see use state or any state management library like Redux or whatever you want to use for state management. Yeah, that means that most client application can be implemented stateless. And I think as a front-end developer, if you have developed a few bigger React single-page application managing a lot of state on the client, you know how big of a deal this is. Because managing state purely on the client is not as easy. So a lot of hundreds lines of code of your React application, I would think, is related to state management. Yeah, smaller client bundle size. And Remix does the heavy lifting for hydrating, routing, and fetching, and so on and so forth. So everything Alem already mentioned. And for the server, of course, that means the server needs to do the state management. And usually you do this with session cookies or persisted sessions. So you persist the session in Redis, relational database, doesn't matter. And this is something also you have to be aware, right? So if you scale your application and you want to store and retrieve your sessions very fast, that's an implication you have when you want to go from a React single page application to a Remix application, so, because that's what you shift basically. Yeah, and you get optimized backend endpoints. So there is no over or under fetching usually, because you have the code very co-located to your components anyways. So Remix splitting it up accordingly, and it does the heavy lifting for this. And what I mentioned before, if you use like in the previous scenario where you have separated backend teams, which is deploying an API, your APIs, you oftentimes end up having like, okay, the backend team deploys something, you have the frontend team wanting to fetch this and this data in that and this and or that way, and then you realize in the staging environment, oh, it's not like what we discussed actually, so we need to talk to each other, and so you have these mismatches oftentimes. And this can also not happen in this scenario. And yeah, as I said, you don't need a core setup in this case when you want to like reuse your existing backend API. Yeah, because on the backend you don't need a core setup, and also authentication flow is usually a little bit easier done on the backend side. Okay, so if I have stated the obvious to you, so I'm sorry first of all, but I think it's important to for everyone to understand and to be on the same level, because we might have different backgrounds, and I think it's important to understand the reasons how and why to choose between the vast majority of hosting providers and to help you to make the right trade-offs for your application. So speaking of consequences for our Remix deployment, so we need when we choose a hosting provider, our hosting provider needs to not only serve static content, obvious, but it should also be able to run server-side JavaScript code, handle incoming requests, and execute our application code accordingly. So you might say, okay, still, it doesn't help me to narrow down what deployment options I do have, right? So there were plenty of options, and if you look on X, you see a lot of people saying like, yeah, okay, which deployment provider should I use? Should I go bare metal? Should I go serverless? So there's this, yeah, I go bare metal again. No, I go serverless again, and there is no. It's just purely made on either on price or not specific to your application. And so I want to bring up this visualization of a high level of categorization of hosting providers or cloud computing providers. And as you can see, there is like on the very left, you have the traditional on-premises server, the bare metal server, so to say. You have the infrastructure as a service, container as a service, platform as a service, functions as a service, and software as a service. And I guess there are plenty of other as a service in between. So this is not a strict categorization. It's just a high-level overview. But the important part I want to point out here is, as you can see, indicated with the blue and the green colors, there is a difference what you have to manage and what the cloud or the hosting provider manages for you. So that means on the left side, you have the highest flexibility, but also the highest responsibility for managing your infrastructure. And this also means that you have to do the most undifferentiated heavy lifting work, right? And the more you go to the right side, obviously you have less flexibility, but also less responsibility of managing your infrastructure. And that also means then you have way more time for your actual business logic, for your actual application to build. So you have more time for building features your users want to see, right? You're paying customers. But there is no right or wrong. I don't say don't use the left side because it's bad, because it means more responsibility for you. I also don't say, yeah, aim for the very right, because you don't have any responsibility and more time. It's just you have to think about your application, your requirement, and depending on that, make the right trade-offs and choose the right approach. Everything in the middle is also allowed. Yeah, and when it comes to Remix, so my personal opinion is that I guess that most applications should default to one of these categories. So either container as a service, platform as a service, or function as a service, or also called serverless approaches. And for that, and today I want to show you two examples for one of these categories. So on the one hand, you could say container as a service, I give you an example, and also function as a service, I will give you an example. But that doesn't mean these are the only options, it's just like as an example. Yeah, so what are these common deployment options? As I said, today I want to show you a representation and example for the container as a service. I will show you Fly.io. And example for function as a service or serverless, and I will show you Cloudflare Pages. But there are plenty of other options, like examples for bare metal or on-premises would be Hetzner. I don't know if is Hetzner used here in this area. No, Hetzner it's based out of Frankfurt, so it's more like maybe in the DACH area. Also Ionos. So I don't know I'm pretty sure you also have like a bare metal provider here, or cloud providers like AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, and platform as a service providers like Vercel. They can also deploy Remix, by the way, not only Next.js or Netlify. Interesting side note here is many of the platform as a service provider built on top of other cloud providers. So for instance, Vercel is built on top of AWS Lambda, mostly, or let's say AWS as a cloud, as an infrastructure provider and using Lambda. And they use Cloudflare as their CDN. So also when it comes to pricing, you understand they can never go cheaper than what they are built on top, right? Okay, let's start with Cloudflare Pages. So what is Cloudflare Pages? So according to their very own page, so it's a Jamstack platform. JavaScript, what is it actually called? Jam? Does anybody know? I used to know this, but I forgot. Anyways, so it's a Jamstack platform, so obviously it is something for front-end developers to collaborate and deploy websites. Sounds cool, sounds good, let's use it. It integrates with Git, specifically with GitHub. So it's, if you deploy, if you have your code hosted on GitHub, it's super easy to get preview environments and automatic deployments when you merge to your main branch. Thank you. So JavaScript, APIs, and markup. So that's the Jamstack. Thank you. And yeah, as you could have guessed, Cloudflare Pages uses their own global edge network automatically. So as you remember, we are more on the, so from your perspective, we are more on the right side. So it's a function as a service. So this means you don't have to do anything to scale your application. But less flexibility, remember, serverless. It needs custom integration in your code because you need to do request handling specifically for their runtime, because their runtime can only run JavaScript code. Yeah, and also as a side note, I want to mention, so specifically the last part needs custom integration in your code, because sometimes you hear the term lock-in effect, right? Lock-in, you could also say like you never logged in, because in reality you are never logged in. It's just a very high migration cost you have. And so to avoid this high migration cost, if you use good abstractions, you will never be logged in. You will always have migration cost, but you will never be logged in. So whenever you choose something with less flexibility, make sure you do good abstractions, because then your migration cost, if you want to move away from your deployment provider or whatever it is, library, you have lower migration cost. Okay, Cloudflare Pages demo. I'm a little bit nervous because I want to do this live. Yeah, let me quickly set this thing up. No. Wrong monitor. Oh, that's the way I want. Yeah. Okay. So what we want to do is start and deploy something. On Cloudflare Pages. So I'm already logged into my Cloudflare account and I go to workers and pages. So first of all, I create a new project, and I do this by running so I use pnpm by default, so but it's similar to npm. So if you would use npm, it would be npx. In this case, it's just pnpx, so that's the same. Just if you're wondering. So Cloudflare comes with a create script, create Cloudflare. We use the latest version of it. We give our application a name. In this case, it's my Remix app Cloudflare Pages demo, because I couldn't come up with an even longer name. And we default to framework Remix. So let's run it and hope the internet is good. Yeah, perfect. So and now this guides you basically to what you want to do. It's a website or a web app, and Cloudflare comes does support a very, by the way, do you see, is it big enough or, yeah? So yeah, Hono, Gatsby, Next, Nuxt, Quick, React, and Remix. So now we create the Remix application. Yes, we want to initialize a Git repository. Yes, we want to install the dependency with pnpm. So this usually takes a little bit of a time, but not so long as with npm. So you should use pnpm. Done. And it committed everything to Git. And we are already like in step 2 of 3. Do you want to deploy your application? Sure, why not? If you see this pnpm Wrangler, this Wrangler is the CLI tool for Cloudflare. So Cloudflare's build tool and CLI for interacting with their Cloudflare pages or Cloudflare workers environment is called Wrangler. Is that better? Okay, so it seems that it deployed already the application. And we just wait for DNS to propagate. Let's reload this here. Yeah, as you can see, the application is already here. Let's try to visit the page. Can't be reached. Still, DNS is still propagating. Let's wait. We can, in the meantime, look at the details here. You can see the asset it uploaded, the functions. I will show you the code in a second. You can also do redirects and specify some headers for certain assets. So if you want to cache them longer, but you can also like manage the deployment, add environment variables and all this kind of stuff. And now it seems that it's an error, but usually that just means that it timed out and we are able to see our Remix application. So yeah, it deployed it to our very long name, .pages.dev. And basically that's it. That's what you need to deploy a Remix application to Cloudflare Pages. Let's just have to, yes. Okay, so we are here in our repository. I open it up with my code. Move that to the left, move that to the right. And yeah. Yeah, I have my file tree on the right side. So yeah, that's a pretty standard Remix application when you use also create Remix. So you have your app folder and your lead config, but what you also have in addition is you have your Wrangler toml file, which is the configuration for Cloudflare Pages, but you also have your functions folder and dedicated file. And this is what I meant with you need custom code. You need to write custom code so that Cloudflare Pages understands what to do with the request. So in this case, you can see we import directly from Remix.run for the Cloudflare Pages a create pages function handler. So this is a pre-made function which basically takes in the request as it comes in from Cloudflare Pages, does something to it, and then passes it to Remix. So from the perspective of Remix, it's just a regular request. You don't have to make any changes to your code. That's a good thing. There's one additional thing you have to do in the entry.server file. Usually in a standard Remix application, you could even delete those files because these files are pre-generated. It's a standard code. But for Remix, for Cloudflare, you need these files because you need to use specific like app load context and entry context in this case to pass, because this is different to Cloudflare. Yeah, and so let's start this in development mode here. So yeah, this is, as you can see, deployed to localhost. Let's make some changes here. And let's say we want to add a link here. So the website for the address for our website. Of course, it needs an emoji. So yeah, and as you can see on the left side, live reload, I didn't even have to save. And the link is here. Does it work? Yes, it does. Okay. Enough for testing. Let's deploy to production on a Friday. Git status. Okay. Let's add this. Let's commit it. Edit link. No, not link. And then let's do npm run deploy. So when you use create Cloudflare script, they add some run scripts to your package.json. So, and these are not by default in there on a Remix application, but when you use create Cloudflare, they add it for you for convenience. So let's do npm run deploy. It builds. So as you can see, build client and also build server. This is what I showed you in the presentation. And let's switch to the browser, close, and here we are. It's deployed on production. So of course, this is a super simplified approach here, but just to show you, I literally started from scratch and deployed to production, and it's, yeah, really not that bad. It's also super simple for Cloudflare to have like integrated with GitHub. If your code is on GitHub, you just add the code on your Cloudflare dashboard. You can connect your GitHub repository, and just by connecting it, it will set up all the hooks needed. Whenever you push something to certain branches, it will automatically deploy preview environments for every commit. So for every commit hash, you get a separate UL, and you can define your main branch. And whenever something gets committed to this main branch, it will automatically deploy them to production. Okay, so that was it for Cloudflare Pages. No, wrong. Actually, doesn't matter. Yeah. So yeah, these are just backup slides in case everything goes wrong. I just made screenshots. Yeah, next Flyo. So Flyo, if you remember, so Cloudflare Pages was more on the right side, serverless approach, and Flyo is container as a service. They don't call themselves like this, but you could categorize them as such. So because that's from their website, so they transform your container you might already have, like Docker containers, into micro virtual machines. Micro VMs, by the way, they use Firecracker. And Firecracker is also the same micro VM. It's an open source project by AWS, by Amazon, which Lambda uses. So it's basically the same micro virtual VM. What does it mean, micro VM? So if you think of a virtual machine like a VirtualBox or I forgot the other names, it usually takes a little bit longer to spin them up and spin them down. In this case, it's really fast, so around about 300 milliseconds from completely stopped to up and running. It scales to 0, which is important for your costs. And the difference to Cloudflare Pages is it can run anything. So it's not like a JavaScript deployment hosting provider. Since you basically package your application in Docker containers, it really can run anything. And because your code is already in your container, it's super easy to clone and scale your application across the globe. This is from their website. These are their current regions. I think it was like 35 regions at the moment. So yeah, when you say, okay, my clients are more in the US, you just deploy some on the East Coast, West Coast, and then you basically are good to go. If you're in Europe, you search for a location in Europe. If your audience is worldwide, okay, of course you deploy to worldwide regions. This is beneficial if it comes to cost, right? So this is a cost optimization thing compared to like a serverless approach, which is by default deployed to edge, and globally, this could be a cheaper option. Okay, let's do the same for Fly.io. So for Fly.io, we use the default create remix script. So you see that it's nothing Fly.io related. So we just spin up the regular remix script. It asks me where do I want to, which folder do I want to create? I leave it as this. And so as you can see, this is the same script which was run by Cloudflare Pages as before. We want to install the dependencies. And wait a second. And done. And the next step is to use Fly launch. So if you haven't installed, I'm on macOS, I use Brew. So what you have to do is install their flyctl. So that's a global binary you install. I already have done that. And if you have done it once, you just say Fly launch. As you can see, it detected a Remix application. So if I have not specified it, this name is already taken. Yeah, so I want to continue in the web UI, so it opens up my browser, and I say I want to use our company's organization. I say Sarajevo Meetup, and it automatically detects the fastest region where I'm right now. It seems it's Bucharest. I leave it as this. I can also say like I just need 512, and I confirm my settings. And the terminal continues. And this will look familiar. So as you see, it created a Docker file, and now it's building the image. If you ever use Docker, this output will be familiar with you. The cool thing about Fly is, though, I don't have Docker installed on my machine. So I can build my deployments for Fly without having Docker installed, because it will remotely build the Docker container on Fly infrastructure. So that's super handy. I don't like to have like this huge Docker binary installed on my machine. Well, this takes a while. Okay, pushing images. It provisions already the IPs, and I get an URL where it says like I can watch the deployment happen live. So on the right side, it's on the Fly dashboard, and you can see what it does on its end. So what it pulls, what it pushes, whatever. And you can see that it uses 2 machines in the Bucharest region, and it's done. And I also get a nice handy URL, my remix app Sarajevo Meetup fly.dev, and this is what we get. And of course, I also want to show you this code. So let's go here. And yeah, as you can see, the familiar folder structure, app, and so on and so forth. And a few files were added by fly launch. As you could have guessed, a Docker file. This was completely generated. I started from scratch, right? And the fly launch just generated this for me. If you've never used a Docker file or anything like that, don't be afraid. This might look like just gibberish, but it isn't. It's actually, if you take a little bit closer look, it's just a specification of how to install everything your application needs. Like as you can see, pnpm install, it detected that I used pnpm, so it also generated Docker file like so. So it says like this pnpm version was used. I want to install pnpm. Then install everything from the log file, run build, and then in production, this command gets executed. So basically, it's very, very, very close to what you run locally. And this is what you usually want, right? So you want your application to be in production. You want your production environment very similar to your local environment. This is what you get from it. Yeah, and also has this TOML file for Fly. It's a little bit simpler to read than the Cloudflare Pages one, but it can also get very huge. So you can define how many machines, where you want to run your machines by default, and so on and so forth. On which service you can run multiple applications on one machine. So you can have like multiple long-running processes per machine. You can define the ports, whatever. So a lot of flexibility here. And what you don't see is, so as I said, the entry server, it doesn't has anything imported with Fly. So it's very standard. In fact, I can just like delete this code, and I can also delete this code, and it will still like run dev, same as before. No. So yeah, I just deleted these two files and it still works. Yeah, same here. Let's try to add a link. Same as before. Perfect. Does it work? Yes, it does. Enough testing. Let's ship it. And as you can see, there's a little bit more changes. I deleted these files. You also see the Docker file added, the Docker ignore file. Let's quickly add everything. Edit link, and a little bit of other stuff. And so to deploy that, I would use, again, the fly command. But I can also, before I do that, I can also show you fly status. What you see here is you see where to reach, what is the name of my application, and also how many machines I have. But what I can also do is, like, I can say fly log. Let's move that to the right half. And if you look closely, no, that's local. So when I make requests, it's live, so I can see the live logs from my running application in production. You can also do other things like SSH into the console of any of your machines. So that's the difference what I just showed you, right? Cloudflare Pages, serverless, it doesn't give you the option because there is no SSH. A little bit more to the left side, container as a service, more flexibility, but also a little bit more responsibility. But in the end, we just want to deploy it, fly deploy. And yeah, so all the files necessary gets uploaded to Fly. They build the Docker. Since Docker also has the knowledge of layers, they cache the layers. So they just rebuild what needs to be rebuilt. As you can see, layer already exists. You see a lot of cached things here. So usually it's quite fast. And I think we can also go to the live logs. Let's see the application in the Fly dashboard. Yeah, you see, it's here, live logs. And as you can see, pulling container. So the container which were just built gets pulled and now gets deployed. And let's see, reload. No, it's still, and live, even before I get the notification here. So let's just quickly wait until this is finished. Since I don't see pizza, I know we have a few more minutes, so bear with me. I know I'm the only one standing between you and pizza, but the pizza is not here, so I take the time. Yeah, I mean, we already know that. Application is deployed live. We can see the logs, we can see everything. So we can say again, Fly status. Yeah, deployed. But what we can also do now is, let's say we not only want to have our machines running in Bucharest, but we also have like visitors in Germany or Austria. So what we can do very easily is scale in these regions. So you can look up what regions these are. There's Sydney, Frankfurt, and Virginia. So in total, we say, since we already have one running in Bucharest, we want 4 machines. We just say fly scale count 4. It tells you what it does. It will do. We say yes. And let's quickly switch here over. Yeah, I was already here. Machines. And as you can see, now I suddenly get a machine in Frankfurt, Virginia, and Sydney. And obviously, application is still running. Yeah, I guess this is what I wanted to show you from this aspect. Yeah, that's how easy it is to deploy to Fly. Also some backup slides in case it didn't work. So I also promised you to not leave you alone just with this information. You don't have to remember what I just showed you. Obviously, there is the internet where you can look it up really easily. But also Remix has you covered. So Remix has a lot of templates and also stacks for different scenarios. So templates for not only for deployment options, but for templates, how you want to structure your application, and also comes with full-blown stacks. So and by default, or in the by Remix themselves, they provide the blues stack. So they are named after music genres. So the blues stack comes with a PostgreSQL setup, authentication, testing, linting, and so on and so forth. It will be deployed to Fly, and it's best suited for large enterprise scale applications, mainly because of the Postgres database. Then they have the Indie stack, which is pretty much the same as I just mentioned before. It just uses SQLite instead of Postgres. Might be easier to set up because, SQLite can also be easier set up locally. And is, I think it's a very good, as best for like blogs, marketing websites, content websites, but also like MVPs or POCs. And the last stack is the Grunge stack. Also, it comes with authentication, testing, linting, setup, and so on and so forth. But instead to Fly, it uses AWS as a deployment target, and it uses DynamoDB as a document store or a key value store, so for its database basically. And for compute, it uses Lambda, so it's a serverless approach. And yeah, it's best for highly scalable, large enterprise applications. and or if your client is already on AWS, so it might be handy if you want to use this. Yeah.
My only concern, I know numbers are fast compared to Firebase and everything else, but my only concern is the latency. For example, Lambda has a cold start, and then it will need to travel to the server, communicate, and then to the client. I feel like, would that cause any latency issues, especially when you're on a budget?
So all of the serverless options out there which scale to 0 have theoretically a cold start. And cold start means you have higher latency whenever you request the application. Also, Fly has cold starts, right? So if you scale to 0 and there are no machines running, and you get a request to your application, it takes up to or around about 300 milliseconds, I showed you. And this would be considered as cold start. So when it comes to Lambda, I mean, I was working at AWS, and I was also in the serverless technical field community. So I know a few numbers, and from our numbers back then, as far as I remember, is there is a huge discussion going on about cold starts being a problem, and they are if you happen to have one. But our numbers at AWS showed that only a very, very few percentage of all the requests are seeing cold starts. And it's not like, as I said, yeah, if you want to go to the left side of this spectrum, you have serverless, you have less flexibility, but you get all the benefits of like automatic scaling, and you just pay for what you're using. So of course, this comes with the drawbacks of, okay, it scales to 0, but that means, okay, you don't pay if it's not requested. It's good for you. But if it's not running, you have to have, there will be sometimes a cold start. You can mitigate that by using a CDN in front, caching, and so on and so forth. I wouldn't be that much worried about latency, to be honest. If your application is really latency sensitive, I mean, I would ask, okay, why are you using Remix? Not that Remix is slow or something like that. It's then if you're really saying latency sensitive, then why not Rust or Go or something like that, right? And so I bet that a regular web application is really that latency sensitive that it cannot like have 1 in 1,000 requests, a latency of 300, 500 milliseconds or so. I didn't understand the part where you ask like what back and forth to the backend and to the client.
For example, serverless Lambda triggering on the Remix server, and then Remix server communicating with
No. If you deploy to Lambda, this is your Remix server. So your Remix bundle, your server bundle, gets packaged into a Lambda function. And so your Lambda function is your Remix server. So when you use Remix on AWS on Lambda, and you, for instance, in this case, in this Crunch stack, use DynamoDB as your database, it would be in the same region and availability zone, and so it has low latency to your database. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I was confused at the first photo where there was API gateway as well as.
Of course, I mean, AWS has over 230 something services. You don't necessarily need every single one of it, but yeah, of course, you can also have like API gateway in between. But no, your Remix server is then your Lambda deployed on Lambda. Sure. Yeah, and that's basically it. Last slide. I just want to thank you again, our partners, Terrace House, first and foremost, I want to thank you for being here, for supporting our first Remix meetup here in Sarajevo. And yeah, thanks to our partners again. And also thank you. And let's stay connected. We'd be happy if you would connect, not only with me, but also maybe join also our Discord channel. And yeah, see you next time. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Thomas?
Ah, yeah, sorry, questions. Peter is not here, so we have time.
Don't you hypothetically use SAM for a remix app?
So the question is, could you use SAM deployment for deploying your Remix application? And so for those of you who don't know, SAM is a serverless application model framework from AWS to write, to have code infrastructure as code for deploying your serverless application. And let me think. So SAM uses basically CloudFormation templating language, just a superset of it. Yeah, actually, yes, you can, because when I was working at AWS, I developed together with some other developers at Amazon. They're an internal application using Remix, and I use CDK, but in the end, it's the same. So yes, I think you should be able to do that. I mean, I don't think I say we. Still say we. AWS has a template for SAM for running your Remix application, but I think it should be possible. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sure. I think Vercel supports Remix out of the box. Yeah.
Because for me, it's like, if it's on Vercel, then good or not.
Yeah, no, I understand, right? Because if you already have used Vercel and you know how the tooling works there, you know how the dashboard works, why should you use something else? And that's, yeah, sure. If it fits your needs for your application, why use something else? Sure. Yeah? SEO? You mean in general for a Remix application? So the question was if there are any application to search engine optimization when using Remix. And yeah, there are good ones because compared to a React single page application, so the JavaScript, everything is running on the client, on the browser. And while search engine, namely Google, are getting better and better over time to understand also these single page applications from an SEO perspective, it's still way better to have like server-side rendered HTML get sent, because what the search engine does is like it visits your website, like crawls every link, all the links, and visits all the URLs. If it gets served HTML from the server, which is the case for Remix, it has a way easier job to do so, and it gets crawled faster, and it usually understands your content way better. So yes, it has usually a better SEO ranking. Yeah. I mean, of course, it depends on a lot of stuff. I just don't want to say like use Remix, then you have good SEO, right? But from a technical SEO perspective, you have better chances of having a better SEO rank with Remix than with a purely React server page, single page application. Last question? Yeah?
Yes, so regarding VFF pattern, so if we have a business set that we do not care about SEO and all of that stuff, what are the pros and cons of doing that pattern since, let's say that we have a React with Vite app, and besides that, another layer of say, Remix server that is hitting another, let's say, .NET API, what are the pros to those cons of two network requests or going, if I understood correctly, because I'm not really well versed in that regard. Remix, but to me it seems like we are adding a lot of complexity to, let's say, myself as a front-end developer who is working with React, that I need to manage both now my client and also one additional server that we now introduce all that complexity. What are the pros of that?
Using a BFF.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question was, what are the pros and cons of using a BFF pattern? Are there any implications of it if you already have an existing application? So I think the answer is a little bit in the question already. So if you have already a working backend and a working API, it's usually a huge effort if you say, okay, now we use Remix, so therefore all the backend logic we have to refactor and migrate over. And usually these projects either don't end well or are never going to happen. So so the argument for you actually could be that, okay, we don't have to refactor, just leave, let's just keep our existing working, tested, battle-proven backend, and we just want to have better performance and better developer and user experience by using Remix. You don't need a database because we already have the API. So that's, I would say that's the benefit. I wouldn't be that much concerned about like complexity or like performance issues, because usually what you do if you have already like your backend deployed somewhere, you would also deploy your Remix application close to it, and usually you have single-digit millisecond latency between those, so that you don't, of course, you add a little bit of latency to it, but not so much. So
because I'm finding it hard to get my team to migrate even to loaders and actions. So,
yeah, cool. So you are already using Remix?
yeah, well, I pitched that idea to my team that because right now we are working on a project that is really young, and we are basing a lot of it on a previously built project. But we now get pre-packaged a lot of the abstractions that we made on the previous one, so now it feels like we are throwing away all of the things that we built on top of, let's say, React query and all of that stuff, to migrate even to, let's say, React router, loader, and action.
Yeah.
I find it hard to find that easy way to do that in our current setup.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a good idea to like have a POC or two POCs where you can, so if your team is arguing like, is it even better? So maybe you can have like two simple POCs where you show, okay, look, using Remix, we don't need all of this code, for instance, right?
Yeah,
and then
tried doing that because at the beginning we have like, I don't know, 3 or 4 requests, one of which is a pretty big one to get like a big configuration file, JSON. And
cool. Pizza is already here?
It's close.
It's close.
So you have to have a quick question. How is the testing process for Remix.run framework? Did it change?
On what?
Testing process compared to other frameworks. Specifics or
so maybe since Alem is also here, he can give a little bit more overview. One thing I can say from my perspective is, so if you already migrated to Vite, it's super simple to add vtest because it uses your existing setup, how to bundle your application. So you don't need to write any additional code. You just use vtest, and you can test your application. And since you don't use a lot of use states, it's usually easier to test. But if Alan wants to say something about testing, in addition to that, so yes, there are testing helpers from Remix itself. I think it's not there where other frameworks or libraries are maybe, but it's already very good testable. Yeah.
It's pretty simple to set up a testing environment in Remix because it's well depends on the environment. If you're running in tools, it's simple to set up the whole environment that just runs tests like that. You can also set it up to run multiple environments and run separate tests on separate environments. Like if you want to test your reports, you run them in the browser environment. If you want to test them in another environment, you run that in a separate script, and you can just set up the scripts to run them. I personally just use vtest for most of it because it's not how to read. You can also set up integration tests, and you can actually start up a database in a Docker file, and just run code because usually you use Prisma that's into the database directly. So what you do is create integration tests where you actually create an actual database, you'll see everything, run your tests that actually interact with the database, where you can see the test. It's usually say the database here, it's this and that, it's linked to some other table, whatever. You'll finish the test, you'll kill the database, you test, you go. And then on top of that, you run testing with Playwright, you write your end-to-end test, run them in sort of CI pipeline. Any other questions?
How's Playwright compared to Cypress? Ever tried?
It's faster. It's definitely faster. Cypress. I think Cypress started an revolution in end-to-end testing, and I think a lot of other end-to-end testing frameworks actually took a lot of inspiration from Cypress. And I know Playwright is actually maintained by Microsoft, if I'm not mistaken. And they have a lot of cool features that Cypress doesn't have. I haven't looked at Cypress in a long time, so maybe they do have it now. But for example, in Playwright, you could run a CLI command that opens up in your browser. You can click for it, and it helps generate the test for you, which is kind of a very cool thing to do when you're on a budget or don't have to wait. You just write your test by clicking for it. Why? It's definitely faster. I'm not sure how much faster it is than it is. And yeah, it's a great framework. And I know that they passed. Well, GitHub stars are not really the be-all tell like how good something is, but they passed Cypress a long time ago. So yeah, I think it's a pretty solid choice.
Hopefully push it.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. So, while we wait for the pizza, any other questions? You guys like Remix? Yes. Did someone say no?
Out.
Yeah, we don't like Remix. Yeah, you don't get it. Yeah.
Have you heard about software development?
So, first thing when Alan wake up is to check number of stars.
Damn it. You have not seen this page. Ah, yeah.
But we don't like remix, we like remix.
Combined.
I'm surprised by the MJS in the start.
Yeah, I'm actually really short too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess we need to use actually.
All those influences and that, yeah, they are very cool. They have the money. They get sponsors. I think my frameworks are their CLI.
Yeah, well, actually, Remix is really doing CLI for side application. Thomas showed you two examples, but under the hood, the CLI actually allows you to start it from local templates and you can do it from your private Git repositories. It can start from anything. It just doesn't show it like right away. So yeah, I actually took a lot of your code within my own CLI, but I still can't talk about that. So.
That's good. That's
Okay, that means I see no more questions. The CMF is over now.
No, thank
you everybody.
you very much. Thanks for all the questions.
I hope you enjoyed it. And Thomas, please thank everybody on the stream as well because you have the mic.
Hello, stream. Thank you very much, everyone on the stream, for joining. See you and servus.